Imagine one man buying land so vast it covers more ground than entire states. Ted Turner, the media mogul, turned over 2 million acres of barren wasteland into thriving ecosystems, spending more than $2 billion in the process. From releasing 51,000 bison to saving wolves and tortoises from extinction, his empire redefined what private wealth can do. Stay until the end, because we'll reveal how his ranches now rival national parks. The bold gamble. In 1989, Ted Turner made a move so bold that even his closest advisors thought it was madness. He spent $22 million to purchase 113,000 acres of land in Montana, a barren expanse so ravaged by overgrazing it was described as a moonscape. Where most saw ruin, Turner saw possibility. His vision was to restore this broken land into a thriving ecosystem, a modern-day experiment in rewriting history across the Great Plains. This was no small dream. Over the next 3 decades, Turner committed over $2 billion to acquiring and reviving ranches in 15 states, amassing more than 2 million acres, a land portfolio larger than the state of Delaware. But the Montana purchase was the first spark, and it set the tone for everything that followed. Instead of chasing immediate returns, he invested in time, nature, and patience. Turner understood that the Great Plains had once been ruled by vast herds of 60 million bison, animals that shaped the ecosystem for centuries before nearly disappearing by 1890. At the time of his purchase, fewer than 1,000 remained across the continent. He believed that bringing them back could also bring the land back to life. The first step was not construction or farming, but rewilding, a concept almost unheard of in American ranching during the late 20th century. The risks were enormous. Local ranchers doubted him, economists dismissed him, and environmentalists questioned if it could even be done. After all, he wasn't buying prime farmland or city real estate. He was buying ecological debt. But Turner's gamble was never just about land. It was about proving that capital could heal landscapes just as easily as it could build skyscrapers or media empires. Slowly, the transformation began. Where cattle had left soil compacted and streams polluted, Turner's restoration team seeded native grasses, removed invasive plants, and prepared the land for the return of bison. His ranch wasn't designed to mimic nature. It was designed to let nature rebuild itself. The investment in Montana became the blueprint for a Trillionaire-Style conservation empire that challenged the very idea of what private wealth could achieve. So tell me, was this vision pure genius or reckless gamble? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The bison resurrection. When the first bison were released onto Turner's Flying D Ranch in Montana, the scene was nothing short of symbolic. Animals that had been confined for generations suddenly stepped out into an open horizon, rediscovering instincts buried for more than a century. They kicked up dust, rolled in the soil, and scattered across the prairie as though reclaiming territory that once stretched unbroken, from Canada to Texas. From that beginning, Turner's herds multiplied into a force of ecological engineering. Today, his ranches host over 51,000 bison, the largest private collection in the world and nearly 10% of the entire North American population. Unlike cattle, whose grazing patterns had stripped the land bare, bison restored balance. Their heavy hooves churned compacted soil, allowing water and seeds to penetrate. Their wallowing, rolling their massive bodies in shallow depressions, created microhabitats where rainwater pooled and insects thrived. Each act, instinctive and ancient, rippled outward across the ecosystem. The results were visible not only to those on horseback, but even from space. NASA satellite imagery documented the transformation. What had once appeared as endless stretches of brown in the early 1990s slowly shifted into vibrant patches of green. Within a decade, thousands of acres of prairie grasses returned, along with wildflowers, insects, and bird species unseen for decades. But the revival extended beyond grass. With the bison came predators and scavengers that had long vanished. Golden eagles circled overhead, coyotes prowled the edges of herds, and prairie dogs re-emerged, their colonies aerating soil further. Turner's decision to let nature dictate the pace of restoration created a cascading effect, reviving food webs that scientists once thought permanently fractured. The significance was more than environmental, it was cultural. The American bison, reduced from an estimated 60 million in the 1800s to fewer than 1,000 by 1890, symbolized both the excesses of human exploitation and the potential for renewal. By rebuilding herds on private land, Turner reframed the species as not only a relic of history, but a living cornerstone of modern conservation. What began as a gamble on ruined soil became a spectacle of rebirth as herds thundered across grasslands that had not seen their shadows in generations. In restoring the bison, Turner restored the land itself, demonstrating how nature, given space and time, can heal in ways no machine or money alone could manufacture. Saving the almost lost. Beyond the spectacle of thundering bison herds, Turner's empire became a refuge for species so close to extinction that many experts had already written their obituaries. His ranches did not merely host wildlife, they became laboratories of survival, where two of the planet's most imperiled creatures found a second chance: the Mexican gray wolf and the bison tortoise. The Mexican gray wolf, once ranging widely across the American Southwest and northern Mexico, had been driven to the edge of oblivion by relentless hunting and habitat loss. By the late 20th century, fewer than 50 wolves remained worldwide. Government programs struggled, hampered by genetic bottlenecks, diseases, and political battles. Turner, undeterred by the odds, introduced them into his own land, giving the animals not just enclosures but space, vast semi-wild pastures that allowed them to rediscover natural behaviors. In 2008, history was made when the first healthy pups in over 50 years were born on Turner's ranch. These wolves, carefully monitored yet allowed freedom, provided a desperately needed infusion of genetic diversity, and many would later be released to bolster wild populations. Equally remarkable was the case of the bison tortoise, a creature that has survived since the Ice Age. Found only in northern Mexico and parts of the Chihuahuan Desert, their population had plummeted to fewer than 2,500 individuals when Turner intervened. Unlike wolves, their challenge was not persecution, but biology itself. These tortoises take 15 to 20 years to reach sexual maturity, and females lay clutches of eggs only every few years. Experts doubted a captive breeding program could ever scale meaningfully. Turner proved them wrong. By dedicating significant acreage of his New Mexico ranches to their care, complete with secure burrows and long-term monitoring, he created one of the largest managed populations of bison tortoises in the world. Hundreds have since hatched, a slow but steady insurance policy against extinction. What unites these two stories is more than rarity. Both wolves and tortoises represent ecosystems in miniature, the predator that restores balance from the top down and the burrowing herbivore that shapes landscapes from below. By investing in their survival, Turner demonstrated that conservation is not just about saving charismatic megafauna, but about restoring the hidden gears of nature's machinery. In a time when extinction often feels inevitable, these programs stand as proof that ambition and resources, when applied with patience, can reverse outcomes once thought permanent. Conservation meets business. If Turner's land empire showed vision, his restaurant chain showed genius. Instead of treating conservation as charity, Ted Turner built a business that turned ecological restoration into a profitable enterprise. The concept was radical. Take the very animals reviving his prairies, the bison, and build a consumer market that would make their survival economically inevitable. In 2002, Turner partnered with restaurateur George McCarrier Jr. to launch Ted's Montana Grill, a dining chain that grew to more than 40 locations across the United States. The centerpiece of the menu was bison meat, sourced directly from Turner's ranches. For decades, Americans had viewed bison as relics of the past, but Turner reframed them as the protein of the future. The pitch wasn't just taste, it was science. Compared to beef, bison contains more protein, less fat, and higher levels of iron and omega-3 fatty acids. At a time when health-conscious dining was on the rise, Turner positioned bison as a premium alternative, lean, nutrient-rich, and deeply tied to America's natural heritage. Customers responded in droves. Within years, Ted's Montana Grill had served over 50 million bison meals, introducing millions of people to a meat once nearly erased from dinner tables. The model was vertical integration at a scale few had seen in conservation. Turner's ranches bred and raised the bison, his restaurants created demand, and the revenue cycled back into maintaining vast herds and restoring ecosystems. In effect, every bison burger sold was not just a meal, it was funding for prairie grasses, wildlife corridors, and predator recovery. By making conservation delicious, Turner solved a problem that had plagued environmentalists for decades: how to pay for restoration without relying on philanthropy alone. Financially, the numbers were striking. Analysts estimate the restaurant chain, combined with direct bison sales from his ranches, generated tens of millions of dollars annually. That revenue offset the enormous costs of maintaining 51,000 bison across 2 million acres, ensuring the program's sustainability. Unlike cattle, which often degrade landscapes, bison are perfectly adapted to grasslands. The more consumers demanded bison, the more reason there was to expand herds, creating a feedback loop between profit and preservation. Beyond economics, the restaurants also became classrooms. Each location educated diners about the ecological story behind their meal, weaving conservation into everyday life. Eating at Ted's wasn't just dinner, it was participation in one of the largest private conservation projects in history. So what do you think? Was Ted Turner's decision to serve bison on plates across America the ultimate act of capitalism or the ultimate act of conservation? Let me know in the comments below. Impact on people and places. For all the grandeur of herds and landscapes, Turner's ranch empire also reshaped the lives of people who lived in its shadow. What began as a private vision for ecological recovery evolved into an economic engine pulsing across rural America. The numbers alone are staggering. His network of ranches generates over $100 million in annual revenue, a figure that doesn't simply enrich one man, but sustains communities that had been on the brink of decline. Ranching towns in states like Montana, New Mexico, and Nebraska had long suffered from depopulation, shuttered businesses, and dwindling opportunities. When Turner arrived, he did not just buy land, he injected capital into places that had nearly given up hope. Hundreds of jobs were created across his holdings, from cowboys managing herds of bison, to wildlife biologists tracking species recovery, to mechanics, veterinarians, and seasonal workers who found steady employment where once there had been little. The ripple effect spread even further. Local suppliers, once struggling to survive, suddenly had a steady customer. Feed producers, fencing companies, fuel distributors, and equipment dealers found themselves supporting one of the largest private land operations in the nation. Each paycheck from Turner's ranches circulated through diners, hardware stores, and schools, breathing life back into small-town economies. Tourism too played its part. With thousands of acres restored to wild beauty, ecotourism flourished. Visitors came for guided tours, photography expeditions, and the chance to witness tens of thousands of bison moving across open plains, a spectacle few places on Earth could offer. Hunting programs, carefully managed to ensure sustainability, attracted high-paying clients from around the world. Each visit poured more money into local hotels, restaurants, and guide services. Then there were the taxes. Turner's vast landholdings contributed millions each year in property taxes, stabilizing county budgets that had once been threadbare. Schools received new funding, roads were repaired, and public services improved. In rural counties where a handful of large landowners could determine fiscal health, Turner's empire became not a burden, but a lifeline. The social impact was equally profound. Small towns that once felt bypassed by modern America suddenly had ties to a global figure whose ranches attracted scientists, celebrities, and dignitaries. Local pride grew alongside economic security. Ranch hands could tell stories of working on land visited by international researchers. Schoolchildren learned that their county played a role in species recovery programs studied worldwide. In the end, Turner's empire became more than grasslands and animals. It was an experiment in proving that vast private wealth, when directed toward ecological goals, could also rebuild human communities, showing that conservation and economic prosperity were not enemies, but allies. Science, technology, and predators return. Turner's vast ranches became more than landscapes for grazing. They evolved into living laboratories, drawing scientists from across the globe. Where most ranchers measured success in cattle counts or beef yields, Turner measured it in data points, species recovery charts, and ecological experiments. His properties functioned like open-air universities, places where ecology, climate science, and technology collided on a continental scale. Universities and research institutions partnered with Turner Enterprises to study the mechanics of grassland restoration. Graduate students set up long-term monitoring plots. Professors brought teams armed with soil sensors, cameras, and drones. Subjects ranged from climate change impacts on prairie vegetation to predator-prey dynamics in newly restored ecosystems. Unlike national parks often bound by bureaucracy, Turner's lands allowed faster innovation and flexibility, enabling researchers to test bold ideas on millions of acres. Technology became the silent workforce behind this empire, each bison outfitted with a GPS collar costing over $3,000, transformed into a data point moving across a digital map. These collars tracked migration, grazing intensity, calving cycles, and even early signs of disease. With more than 51,000 animals under watch, the information was vast, creating one of the most comprehensive databases of large herbivore behavior in the world. Weather stations dotted the ranches, feeding streams of information into conservation models. Rainfall, temperature, and wind patterns were logged in real time to predict grass growth and optimize grazing rotations. Drones flew low over prairies, mapping vegetation health, counting herds, and identifying erosion risks with accuracy impossible from horseback. Aircraft performed aerial surveys across hundreds of miles in hours, generating population estimates and habitat maps that once took months of fieldwork. The scientific work dovetailed with a more primal transformation, the return of predators. As grasslands healed and prey populations expanded, mountain lions, bears, and coyotes naturally moved back in. Where other landowners saw threats to livestock, Turner saw completeness. Predators restored the ecological balance, ensuring that weaker bison and deer were removed while stronger animals thrived. His properties soon supported some of the healthiest predator populations in the American West, with surplus animals even relocated to seed recovery projects elsewhere. These returns were not symbolic but measurable. Predators kept prey moving, preventing overgrazing in localized areas. Carcasses fed scavengers, which in turn nourished soil nutrient cycles. The sight of a cougar on a ridge or a coyote weaving through grass was proof that ecosystems long fractured had stitched themselves whole again. By embracing science and technology while welcoming predators, Turner's empire demonstrated something extraordinary: that the future of conservation lies not in resisting nature, but in collaborating with it, at scales grand enough to rival nations. Legacy of a Trillionaire-Style vision. When most billionaires build legacies, they leave behind skyscrapers, yachts, or sprawling corporations. Ted Turner's legacy is measured in acres, over 2 million of them. What began as a gamble on degraded Montana soil grew into the largest private conservation project in American history, an empire so vast it rivals the size of small nations. It is not only the scale that astonishes, but the transformation. Landscapes once written off as ecological ruins are today functioning ecosystems, alive with bison, wolves, tortoises, and predators that had vanished for generations. The sheer financial commitment alone is staggering. Turner poured more than $2 billion into land purchases and restoration projects across 15 states, creating a conservation empire larger than Delaware. Yet, unlike charity that fades once the money is spent, this model generates over $100 million annually, proof that conservation and profit can be allies rather than enemies. His ranches fund themselves through bison sales, hunting programs, ecotourism, and Ted's Montana Grill, turning environmental restoration into a self-sustaining economic engine. The results reverberate far beyond his fence lines. Turner's lands hold 51,000 bison, nearly 10% of North America's total population, but they also serve as genetic banks for endangered species like the Mexican gray wolf and Bolson tortoise. Predators roam freely, prey herds grow stronger, and restored rivers provide water that sustains downstream farms and towns. In effect, his empire doesn't just serve private interests. It delivers public goods at a scale that many governments struggle to achieve. What makes Turner's vision Trillionaire-Style is not only the billions spent, but the mindset. He thought in centuries rather than quarterly profits. A tortoise that takes 20 years to reproduce, or a wolf pack needing decades to stabilize, fit comfortably within his horizon. While others looked for immediate returns, Turner built a dynasty of land and life that will outlast him, a living monument to the idea that private wealth can reverse extinction. The cultural impact is equally profound. Millions of Americans who eat at his restaurants or visit his ranches experience conservation not as an abstract lecture, but as something tangible on their plates and in the landscapes around them. Scientists publish papers from his ranches, school children tour restored prairies, and rural families build livelihoods from jobs his empire created. His work reshaped how Americans think about the role of private landowners, not just as exploiters of resources, but as stewards with power equal to governments. Ted Turner's story challenges every assumption about wealth and legacy. It asks whether greatness lies in accumulation or restoration, in skyscrapers of glass or in prairies reborn with thunderous herds. His empire is not only a ranch, it is a wilderness reborn at billionaire scale, a vision so audacious it redefines what one person can achieve with money and conviction. So tell me, do you think Turner's greatest legacy is the billions he invested or the millions of acres he left alive again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. You've just seen how Ted Turner's Trillionaire-Style ranch empire transformed over 2 million acres into living laboratories of conservation and profit. From bison herds worth hundreds of millions to wolves and tortoises pulled back from the brink, his vision reshaped both ecosystems and rural economies. His restaurant chain, Ted's Montana Grill, has served over 50 million bison meals, proving business can fund restoration. Turner's legacy is not just land ownership, it's rewriting what private conservation looks like. If you enjoyed exploring this empire of land, wildlife and vision, don't forget to like, subscribe to Billionaire Story and hit the bell for more.